Gunnar jumped down from the flying wolf. Thorkel stared at Brunhild and her mount, his mouth open, ready to take to his heels, but Rorik laughed. He ran up to Gunnar and flung an arm around his shoulders. "You see, Thorkel," said Rorik, "I told you he'd come." "You did tell me, Rorik," said Thorkel, over and over again. "Where's Wiglaf?" said Gunnar. "I thought he'd be with you." "I am," whispered a voice from inside the Sea Eagle, "but I'm not coming out until that creature is gone." Wiglaf was nervously peering at Brunhild and her great beast from between two shields on the ship's side. "The rest of his lads are hiding in the woods," said Rorik, grinning. "I can't blame them," muttered Thorkel. "I might join them soon." "You won't have to," said Rorik. "I think she's about to leave." Gunnar looked around and saw he was right. "It is time to say farewell, Gunnar Bjornsson," said Brunhild. Her wolf snorted as if it was saying farewell too. "I wish you strength in your sword arm and luck in the coming storm of blades, and I hope it will be many years before you ride with me again." Brunhild and her wolf rose into the pale sky and swiftly flew away down the fjord. She looked round at Gunnar once, and then she was gone. Gunnar sat by a driftwood fire and caught up with what had happened to his friends. It seemed that Odin himself had appeared in their camp and told them to set off. They had reached the fjord that very morning, and Rorik had already taken a scouting party up to the woods above the steading. "Scully has had your hall rebuilt," he said. "There are a few scorch marks on the wall, but he's got a new roof that probably keeps the rain out." "Did you see him?" said Gunnar. "Man with a big black beard, struts around like he thinks he's important," said Thorkel. Gunnar nodded. "We saw him." "We also saw plenty of fighting men," said Rorik. "Some who didn't look like they'd be much of a problem. Some who did." Sir Scully had brought in more of his warriors, as well as Grim and his wolfmen. "How many men do you think he has altogether?" Gunnar asked. 30, maybe a few more," said Rorik. "So with Wiglaf and his lads, I think we're evenly matched. There was a lot going on though." "Rorik's right," said Thorkel. "The kind of hustle and bustle you see in a steading when it's been prepared for some kind of special occasion." "Like for a wedding?" said Gunnar, his blood running cold. Rorik and Thorkel glanced at each other. "Did you see my mother?" "No, I don't think so," Rorik said, his voice gentle. "If Scully does intend to marry her, I guess he wouldn't let her out to the hall." "So it's today, a year and a day since the hall burned down," said Gunnar. "Well then," said Thorkel, breaking into his thoughts. "What's the plan?" "We take back my steading," Gunnar said grimly, "and I kill Scully." "Spoken like a man," said Rorik, clapping him on the shoulder. But Gunnar still didn't feel like a man, however hard he tried. They climbed the path into the woods an hour after sunset. 30 men in chainmail, starlight glinting off their helmets, their weapons quietly chinking, the dead leaves of autumn rustling under their iron-shod boots. After a while they reached the edge of the forest and looked down at the steading. "We don't like it," whispered Wiglaf. "We might be walking into a trap." "What do you think, Gunnar?" said Rorik. "Is Scully expecting you?" "I doubt it," said Gunnar, remembering the way Scully had spoken to him. "I'd be surprised if he's given me a moment's thought since the night I left." "That's good enough for me," said Rorik. "Let's go." He ran down the slope, the rest following, a wave of warriors heading for the gate in a silent rush. Gunnar kept up, but couldn't help wondering why Wiglaf and Thorkel stayed just in front of him, and Erland so close behind. They were behaving like bodyguards, Gunnar realised. They still thought of him as a boy, someone they needed to protect. And why should they think anything else? They had never seen him fight, after all. Not that he had ever fought properly. He knew how to hold his sword and shield, felt comfortable in his chainmail. He had learned the lessons of those practice sessions with Father in Valhalla. But that's all they'd ever been. Practice, not the real thing. He had never stood toe-to-toe with the warrior who knew how to kill him. Suddenly, his new confidence began to drain away. They reached the gate, and Rorik led them in. A couple of wolfmen were standing just inside, warming themselves at a brazier. They took one look at the armed men approaching and ran for their lives. "To arms! We're under attack!" they yelled, and Rorik grinned. "That should wake everyone up," he said. By the time they got to the longhouse, men were pouring out of it, pulling on chainmail, fumbling with their weapons, helmets askew. Gunnar wasn't sure what he had expected to happen next, but it was shocking in its swiftness. Rorik sprinted forwards, screaming a war cry. His blade flashed in the torchlight, and he cut down 2 wolfmen before they could raise their shields. Thorkel and Wiglaf made short work of several more. Then Gunnar was in the thick of it, a wolfman raining blows on his shield. Around him blades rose and fell. Spears jabbed and snapped. Men grunted and yelled and screamed and died. Gunnar gasped for breath, his shield heavy on his arm. A wolfman swung an axe at him, and he ducked, the blade swishing just over his head. He raised Deathbringer, but Erland stepped forward and cut the wolfman down. "Don't worry, Gunnar, we'll take care of you," said Erland, grinning at him. The wolfman's blood was spattered over Erland's cheek and chest. "I don't want you to take care of me," Gunnar yelled. Erland, however, was fighting, not listening. Before long, most of the wolfmen were dead, and those who were still alive turned and fled, keen to save their skins. But 6 warriors stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the longhouse, their shields overlapping and swords raised. Gunnar recognised them as the men who had been with Scully when he had first come to the steading. They had killed several of Wiglaf's crew in the fighting, including Einar Squinteye. Now they stared at Rorik and Thorkel and Wiglaf and the others, who stared back at them from behind their own shields. "All right, lads," said Thorkel. "If you yield now, I'll ask the true lord of this steading if he'll spare your lives, or you can die. It's up to you." True lord of the steading? Gunnar realised that was him. Scully's warriors said nothing, and the only sound beneath the dark sky was that of torch flames, flapping and hissing. Then the shield wall parted, and Gunnar saw Grim's archers, arrows notched in their bows, and Grim himself drawing his sword. "They seem to have made their minds up, Gunnar," said Rorik. Gunnar saw that Grim was surprised by the mention of his name, and that now the wolfmen's chief was studying him with a puzzled expression. Gunnar smiled, then nodded at Rorik, and the bloodletting began again.